All right. Good morning, guys. Welcome back to Coffee with Toffees, your morning show for all the information you need on Dota 2 and the world around you. Excited to be bringing you some great content today, and we'll lead off with a couple of introductions, folks. First and foremost, I want to introduce myself. My name is Toffees. You can follow me at Toffees_Dota2. You can find the show at SoundCloud. You can find it on YouTube. You can now find it officially on iTunes. The podcast, the dream is real. It's all up there for you guys for your consumption enjoyment. That was my wife who just wandered through the video and said hello for those of you who haven't met her before, which brings me to Baby Watch 2014. Baby was due 2 days ago, which means at any time whatsoever, I may have to go to the hospital. So I've got a great guest today, and he may have to forgive me if my wife goes into labor because we're going to cut the show short, and I'm going to get on out of here. That said, though, my guest today is the stat man for Join Dota in official capacity. He's also been playing since TI2, got his start, and a lot of you probably didn't know this, doing stats with Shivar. It is Alan Nahaz Bester. How are you doing today, sir?
Well, I'm doing great. Long-time listener, first-time caller, as it were, my friend. I've been listening to the show for a while. You do a great job, and I'm excited to be on.
Long-time listener, first-time. I like that. That makes me sound like, it's this kind of thing people say when they call it like Bob and Tom. Lovely.
Exactly.
Lovely. All right, so Nahaz is joining me today. He's going to jump in, talk whenever he feels like it. He is great to have you in the studio, and we're going to talk about pro news and roster updates to start. So first and foremost, the one that I think was the most interesting to me over the week, and I think we all saw sort of played out yesterday, was Na'Vi has their brand new roster. We know that they lost a couple of guys, and they replaced them with FNG and VanScore. So FNG, if you don't know, was the drafter for Power Rangers prior to moving over to Na'Vi. VanScore was part of Team Empire. So both were on established teams that were very good in their own right. And I feel kind of bad for PR because PR was having a really great run prior to losing FNG. And I'm going to be honest, though, I watched Na'Vi play, and I actually cast their PR game and got to watch a little bit of their Tinkerino game. Had some trouble with connections, but we'll talk about that later. And I thought that they looked very good for a team that had two brand new players on their roster. Did you have a chance to watch them at all yesterday, Nahaz?
I did, actually, and so there are really two things about this story. Number one is the identity of the two players. So for people who aren't familiar, as you said, FNG does come from PR. He's relatively young on the Dota 2 scene. He's got just over 300 Pro Dota 2 appearances, and 270 of those are with PR. So he's a guy that's really spent most of his time with one team. Did, in spite of his youth, do the drafting, and this is a little bit of a case of if you can't beat him, join him, because Power Rangers, during his tenure there, had a number of wins over both Na'Vi and Alliance, including a number of games where people really felt that FNG outdrafted them. Yeah. He's a very young talent, has a very, very diverse hero pool, and I think fits with what Na'Vi tries to do very well. Now, VanScore is the other new acquisition, and he's a little bit more established player. And he spent most of his career with Empire, including the amazing run that they were on earlier this year. I don't think a lot of people realize in 6.80, Empire had a 73.4% win rate. That's behind only EG, and they were the only team with over 100 wins.
Yeah,
now,
I mean, there was a point where there was a point where we thought that they could potentially win TI. Like they were phenomenal. I remember actually talking to people about picks for TI, and Empire was in my top 3 every single time. But as you can see, that didn't work out, and now obviously VanScore leaving the team puts Empire in a little bit of a rough position.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had made a list, even in like April, right around the time that 6.81 came out, who were the favorites for TI, I think Empire would have been in everybody's top 3.
Absolutely.
The one thing that I am concerned about, though, with this is the state of the current meta. A lot of people have spent a lot of time talking about how and whether Na'Vi is going to adapt to the current metagame, because last year around TI3, Alliance kind of won playing this style that not many teams were playing. That's not necessarily the case with the current metagame. I mean, Vici Gaming showed up at TI playing essentially the same style of Dota that they showed up playing at EMS1 last fall and took everybody's lunch money.
Yeah.
And it took until the grand final of TI until somebody could beat them. So there's a sense definitely among people and among me as well that this metagame is here to stay. And the one thing specifically with these two new acquisitions, if you look at the top 6 teams in TI, okay, everybody knows about Zai and Aoi 2000. Right. Most serious fans probably know about Lanham, and probably know about FY. Okay? Very serious fans will also know about Banana and DD. Okay?
Right.
But if you go 1 through 6 in the top 6 teams of TI, they had probably the best 4 position players in the tournament. That's no disrespect to anybody else, okay? But the 4 role, that farming support role, is just so huge right now. And if you look at FNG's stats with Power Rangers, and even more telling to me, VanScore's stats with Empire, because Empire was a team that was winning a lot of games. Neither of them is really that hard farming support. And you really wonder whether or not Na'Vi is going to kind of keep playing the same style of Dota, because obviously they're very, very good, but the current era is just so competitive. The edges are so much smaller. You really do wonder whether Na'Vi can still continue to win and find that same success playing their old style.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and I think that these 2 new players who, like you said, do fulfill those support roles and kind of can come in. FNG went straight to the drafting yesterday, which was great to see, are going to hopefully infuse a little bit of that new style into Na'Vi, which we saw. PR was kind of like, to me, they were a lot of fun to watch. They sort of were in that middle world of what Na'Vi used to play like, and the modern meta, right? They're very aggressive. They're a lot of fun to watch. And a lot of that's because of FNG's draft. So I think that FNG moving over to Na'Vi is going to be a good thing for them. But enough about Na'Vi. Let's talk about some of the other big ones. Newbie. This is a pretty big one. Newbie buys rights to have Rabbit on their team, all right? So this is the kind of stuff you hear about in like the NFL. We bought the contract for this player, or if you're in the England, the EPL, they buy Rabbit from LGD for $130,000 in U.S. currency. That's a pretty big chunk of money for an esports player. Keep in mind, that's not his personal contract. That is rights to buy personal contract. So that basically means that they're paying LGD, from what I understand, to get him over there and then taking over his contract. And that's a pretty massive thing for esports, for us to see and hear about that going on.
Yeah, it really is, and keep in mind also, this is the 3rd time that Newbie has done that. So they paid just over $16,000 for How. They paid $81,000 for Zhao 8, and now they're paying $130,000 for Rabbit. And I mean, this is a big deal, as you brought up the comparison to other sports. So minimum salaries in Major League Baseball and the NBA are both around $500,000, but minor league salaries in both of those sports are really only around, and minor league contract values are really only modest 5 figures.
Right.
So we are talking about a considerable sum here on a scale that is comparable to at least sort of the young players in other sports. I completely agree with you. This is a big thing for esports. Yep. The other thing to bring up here is the identity of the player involved.
Right.
Because I think if you'd have talked to people, both serious fans from the Western scene and fans of the Eastern scene over the summer, particularly early on, I think Rabbit and Luo were probably the 2 most polarizing figures over there. A lot of disagreement in terms of the way these 2 players were playing, their eventual caps. And I think both of those players really vindicated themselves at TI4. And I expect nothing but good things from Rabbit going forward.
Yep, absolutely. TI, as always, has sort of proven the team maker or the player maker, and Rabbit was no exception. Makes a huge transaction, and I expect to see, if that's happening in the Chinese scene and developing there, I'm not going to be surprised to start to see that developing in other scenes as well. Other big news, Empire adds Solo to replace VanScore, which I think isn't as huge a news. It means Empire is now playable. I think they're going to have a little bit of work ahead of them. Obviously, they had that amazing run for a bit. But like you said, replacing those players, especially on a team like Empire, who is built around, and you could maybe refute me on this, but I think that their success back previous to the change in the patch was based entirely around their synergy. They were a team that worked incredibly well together, made really smart moves and choices at the right time. And I think that's really tough to get someone integrated into very, very quickly. So a big challenge ahead for Solo. And another thing that kind of happened all at once was the Chinese scene sort of sorted itself out in a lot of ways.
Yeah, this is big news.
We saw a whole bunch of stuff come out. The biggest one to me, and I've got a bunch of stuff written down, but the one that is the biggest, so I'm going to skip right to it, is Mushi leaves DK to start a new team. That's not the big news. The big news is the fact that now results in DK saying we're dissolving our Dota 2 branch. DK, which is, Dota Kings, has been a staple, a powerhouse, a marquee in the in the esports world of Dota 2 for a very long time, and now they have no representation in Dota 2, and that is kind of mind-blowing to me, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, you're going to see this, though, okay? So we've seen it in other sports. We've seen it in other up-and-coming industries that as the financial stakes get higher, mobility increases, and you kind of see these all-star teams. And DK was a bit of an anomaly last year because DK was the only really international all-star team, although they were all from the Eastern scene. People forget that those players were from a mixture of Chinese and SEA. I think that this is going to become more and more common. You're already starting to see it with some of these roster sort-outs. And DK is basically saying, look, right now we're the guys that have kind of been stuck holding the hot potato or been left without a chair in this game, and we would rather just take a break for a while than try and cobble together a roster of 5 players and maybe compete at the fringes for a couple months. I would be shocked if DK does not have a presence again in Pro Dota 2
within a year.
I mean, but much less, right?
I think so.
Because I'm sure before TI5, but I think that you're going to see something very, very similar. There was a build-up right over this last summer just huge LAN events going into TI. What I'm hoping to see is that next year this will be a little bit better organized. People will know the dates for TI5 a little bit more in advance, and I think you're going to see DK form a team at the latest by next spring, well in advance of that big LAN season. Makes
sense. And DK did announce in their post that they're still looking for up-and-coming talent. So it sounds like maybe they're designing a ground-up sort of. Instead of integrating like a lot of teams are new talent into the team, they're just going to build a synergy from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at EG, right? Look at what EG did. They basically were able to acquire a pre-made roster of 5. Obviously, that deal was in the works for a while, but I don't think that's a bad strategy now if you're DK. Rather than just try and go with duct tape and paper clips, the MacGyver lineup, to kind of sit and wait to see if a young team materializes.
That makes sense. Other big news, or other news in there is Vici or VG, which I think caused a whole lot of confusion during TI and was a lot of fun. Announces their new roster, and it's going to be Black, which I thought was a really interesting addition to it. Ice, Super, Fenrir, and FY, and that's going to be a pretty vicious VG, to be honest with you. I like the addition of Black. I think that the roster looks really, really good, and I look for them to continue the dominating streak.
Foaming at the mouth.
Oh my gosh!
I literally, this to me, when you said big news, this is what I thought you were talking about, because to me, I am a huge Black fan. Obviously I'm a stat geek, and the numbers that he puts up are incredible. But even more than that, if you talk to people around the scene, I have literally never heard a single player say a single bad thing about Black. And he's gone over to this Chinese scene where there's a lot of hesitance toward outsiders. He has put his work in. He has been a great member of a couple organizations over there. That CIS team that he played with were really doing some great things until they stumbled a little bit with all the roster issues and trying to come into the play-in series. I am very, very excited for him. Obviously, Ice has this huge international following. He's probably, along with Mushi, the most recognizable Eastern face on the Western scene. And I mean, Super is, for a long time, been one of the premier mids in Dota. I don't know if a lot of fans realize this. And FY, FY came in and kicked butt at the solo mid challenge last year. This guy is one of the most incredibly individually skilled players in the game, and when I say the era of the 4s, this guy is maybe even a cut above your Aoi 2000s and Zais. I know a lot of Western fans are going to not be happy with that, but this guy is an amazing player. In terms of the sheer talent of this roster, I am so excited to see these guys play together. Yeah, I think it's going to be outrageous and a lot of fun to watch, so keep your eyes on them. Invictus also announced their new lineup, and it's going to be Luo, Ferrari, June, Schwan, and Chisberg, I think is how you say his name. So a little bit different, a little change up for them, not too bad. What do you think of their new roster? Well, I mean, I think the big question that got answered about IG was whether Luo could compete on a high level. That certainly got answered emphatically in the positive, and even I have never seen another player really convince me that a one-position invoker could be a thing until
Right.
Ruo came along. His play was just outstanding, and obviously Ferrari 430 had some of the most amazing individual performances at TI on his Ember Spirit in particular. June and Chisberg are two players that are not as well known. I'm not as familiar with those. I've asked a couple of people more familiar with the Eastern scene than I am, and they're not as established. They're sort of in this more up-and-coming kind of category. So I don't think that I'm ready to comment on IG's new roster quite yet, other than to say, they have a strong core, and I think it's a lot like Navi that they're bringing in two players that are a little bit lesser known, have played maybe on teams that we're not as familiar with. The difference is that in the Western scene, we get to really see those Tier 2 teams compete, and we know a little bit more about the players. In the Eastern scene, especially in China, you don't really get to see that many Tier 2 teams.
Yeah.
Right? It's much more in terms of the media that makes it to us here in the West. It's much more about the Tier 1s. So June and Cheeseburg are kind of these unknowns. I do think that they're going to be fine going forward. Whether or not they'll be with these same 5 players by this time next year, who knows?
Absolutely. So that is sort of your roster news for you guys as we go forward. Now, and one more interesting thing to throw in there is some of you may have heard of a group called Complexity Gaming. They're based out of the Americas. They are have been around since 2004, sponsoring pro gaming teams. Currently, they are in League of Legends and StarCraft 2. They got their start in CS:GO, COD back when that was popular in the early 2000s. A pretty good team, lots of sponsorships. They just put on their website yesterday that today they'll be making a Dota 2 related announcement. So it sounds like Complexity may be signing a new U.S. or possibly South American team to enter the pro scene. And these are guys, they're not a huge team that we all know right now, but the list of their sponsors is Sound Blaster, Newegg Creative, Twitch, Corsair, DX Racer, Scuff Gaming, Cyberpower. Like they've got big sponsors. These guys are a big deal.
My friend.
I'm looking at their list
around TI2. Okay, these guys fielded one of the most entertaining Dota 2 teams to watch. This was Fluff, IX Mike, and TC before they were with Liquid. And Hannah Montana is a name that Dota veterans will remember. A lot of new players aren't familiar with. With all due respect to Universe and Jao 8 and a couple of others, Hannah Montana still probably has the best Tidehunter and Beastmaster that I've seen. Obviously, with Beastmaster, you got to mention Demon because as much as people flame Jimmy, his Beastmaster is just incredible. But Hannah Montana on those two heroes was just unbelievable. If you go back and watch some of those replays from TI2, those are some of the most entertaining individual games in the tournament. I really, if they're able to acquire a roster of that same kind of quality, and that talent is out there right now, okay? This is going to be a fun team to watch, and as you mentioned, there are just some of these organizations that both have a history and are established and well-funded right now. An organization like this choosing to get back into Dota 2 is just such great news for the scene. It's
great news because they're, like you said, an established organization that we know has a legitimate record, is going to take care of their people. That's the kind of thing that we want to see. So Complexity, their website, they said they're going to have some sort of announcement today, so I'll keep an eye on that. If you miss it, we'll talk about it on the show on Friday. So that sort of takes me to other Dota-related news as we move forward today in the morning show. First thing we're going to talk about, and this sort of plays into what we just sort of mentioned on the Complexity Gaming thing. Team Tinker wins the Megaphone playoff, so congratulations to those guys. They won $15,000 for that win over Navi, and it was a resounding win, by the way. They did very, very well against them. And it was actually a pretty good tournament if you got to watch the games. And a lot of, when I say this, it's because there's been a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Chaos, judgment, anger,
is the word you're looking
drama. For. Drama is the word I'm looking for over this tournament. Everything from the Toby Cyborg Mat War to the anger at the hosting to tournament oversight. A lot of this stuff sort of kind of came into play during this whole situation. So long story short, if you missed it, it was broadcast on a new program called See Me Play, which is sort of like a Hitbox or a Twitch. And the quality wasn't there initially. Now, that said, if you played with the settings and toyed with it, Well,
I mean, there were people, there were wonderful people, and I really can't express my appreciation enough. You know, Reddit, as we well know, can be an up and down thing, but if you looked at the Reddit threads, there were actually a lot of people in there that were posting settings, that were posting workarounds, trying to get, you know, these games watchable and quality. And these people, you're awesome, and I'll buy you a beer. I love you. But yeah, there was a huge set of issues with the platform. Yeah. And the number one thing that I think people need to appreciate, you know, say sell out all you want, okay? but this is a business.
It's a business.
We're talking about big dollar amounts now.
Yeah.
And these are contracts that casters and organizations like Join Dota sign.
Yep.
And when an organization approaches Join Dota with a deal that says, look, we have a one-off 2-day event, we're going to have 4 teams that absolutely everybody wants to see right now. Some of them that we haven't seen in action since TI. Okay.
Right.
Somebody is going to cast that, and our viewers, our fans, expect it to be either us or BTS. Somebody is going to cast that. Okay?
Absolutely.
We sign a contract. See Me Play sponsored this whole deal.
Yeah.
There is no this event without See Me Play.
Yep.
And so we're put in the difficult situation where we have to say, okay, do we walk away from this simply because it's a new platform?
Right.
And again, it's one of those deals where I have to believe I am not personally involved with business decisions in Join Dota. Let me see that. I am a professor of economics, but I work with them purely as a hobby.
Right.
Okay. I got to say, though, if it were me making the decisions, if this were a 2-week or a month-long or more league thing like StarLadder, and they came to me and said, we're on a totally new platform, that's a whole different ball of wax. There I'd be concerned. For a 2-day event, okay, look, you want to promote your new platform, great.
Yeah.
The big point in all of this, to wrap up, is that regardless of how disappointed we all were, and believe me, nobody was more livid about this than Toby and I were. Okay?
Right, of course.
But don't flame Toby, please. Right. This is not his call. All right, you flame me if you want to. I can take it. Okay?
I can take it.
Don't flame casters for this because in 99% of situations, it's not going to be their call. And you know, did we learn something here? Absolutely.
Right.
Are we going to be maybe a little bit more reluctant to work with these platforms that are untested, that nobody's ever heard of going forward? Absolutely. But the bottom line is this is a business, and we are in the business of bringing you guys the best quality coverage, the best quality Dota matches that we can. It's very hard to turn contracts like that down.
And, you know, and to be honest, so before I went into teaching and back to acting and stuff, I worked as a regional sales manager. And looking at the business standpoint, right? I'm a caster. I get a phone call or a Skype call. I take a contract to do a gig, and they tell me, here's where you're broadcasting. See Me Play, I honestly feel like, is the ones who sort of, not in trouble, but I feel bad for them in a lot of ways because they invested a fortune in this tournament. The prize pool was large. They had to draw in 4 of the best teams in the world. They had to hire a massive casting house to get everybody directed to See Me Play. And they really had to lose money in the sense of they didn't do a ticket on Dota TV because they wanted to focus everyone at their website. And honestly, how can you prepare for a 70,000 person stress test without actually doing it?
Right. I mean, that's the nature of the business. Without going into too much detail, that's going to bore
everybody.
Well,
no, I feel bad that they lost the money.
It's an upfront cost, right? When you're a new platform, you're going to invest in something like this. It's more like an advertising campaign. You don't really expect it to make you money. It's more an investment in the future. Now, the thing that you feel bad for them on is that it all went
so bad. That's why I feel bad, is that it went sideways.
Yeah, if anything, it's negative advertising.
Right,
so
and
not only did they take the short-term financial hit, which they were probably going to take anyway, but if anything, it was, you know, all publicity in this case is definitely not good publicity.
And that's exactly it, is they spent the money, they took the hit. Unfortunately, it's going to be bad for their platform. As opposed to Hitbox, who's doing the same thing with the Bounty Hunter series. Almost exactly the same format in a lot of ways. Less money, though. And is actually showing, hey, we've got a server that can kind of handle the load. So, See Me Play, going to have some trouble.
So much smarter about it, though.
Oh, absolutely.
I actually really... You know, again, I don't want to get too much into the economics of the business. We can do a special show or something if people are interested in that. But Hitbox has gone about this from a business standpoint in a very smart way, and this actually brings us to another business topic I think that we're going to get started on next.
And we can actually jump right into that now since we are kind of burning through the show. You're talking about the a bit of oversight issue stuff, or?
I was actually going to go next into Amazon.
Amazon. Okay, so let's talk about Amazon, which I think is a great issue. Amazon bought Twitch. For those of you who don't know, Google was previously in negotiations to get their hands on that due to some issues that came up, partly regarding antitrust and some fear about that. Google backed out. Amazon takes the buy. So what were you going to say about the Amazon purchase?
Well, so first of all, I think that on the surface of things, it's hard to say anything other than this is a huge win for those of us that follow esports in the Dota 2 scene. Amazon operates on a much more decentralized business model. They are not known for big acquisitions. The biggest acquisition that they've had before this was buying a company called Zappos, an online shoe company, and I believe that was like it was somewhere in the like 800 million range. So it wasn't far off, but they're not going around buying YouTube like Google. Okay, this was an antitrust concern, but I think the biggest thing, if you read some of the statements that came out around the time of the sale, Amazon was very emphatic in saying, look, we think Twitch is doing a great job.
Yeah.
We want them to continue operating going forward as they have operated. And that's just such a sharp contrast. You saw, obviously, the copyright policy is the single biggest thing, but you saw policy changes at Twitch in the last few weeks and months really geared toward Google, and most of them were things that we really didn't like.
Yeah.
And I think that Amazon, their business model is very different. They're much, much more likely to have a hands-off approach and to sort of preserve the flavor of Twitch as we all know and love going forward. Now, there are going to be growing pains because Twitch is going to keep growing.
Right.
And there are going to be difficulties like last night we had this huge round of DDoS that, that's just a fact of life right now if you're doing e-commerce in any way.
Right.
But I think that this is a big win. Is the big thing. And this was going to happen eventually, and if a big company had to swoop in and buy Twitch, I think Amazon is definitely on the list of companies that you would have chosen.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I think it's the right choice. I've been saying that for a while. I think that their model is going to be far more friendly to a smaller business like Twitch. They're going to keep the staff in place. They're not going to make a lot of changes. They're just they almost see it more as investors or capital investment than it is anything else. So really think of this as an Amazon capital investment. And the way capital investments usually work is they come in, they purchase a company, they invest in making it better with the big money that they have with the interest of just turning more profit in the long run. They don't change a lot at the business. They just give it the cash it needs. And Twitch, for instance, has talked about how they need to increase their infrastructure, how their servers aren't strong enough, aren't good enough, how in certain countries they just don't have the connection speeds they need, and they can't afford to do that. Amazon has the pockets to give them the money to increase those performance issues and increase the infrastructure. And they're going to do it, which means they'll go to 12 new countries, which means 12 times the revenue, which means lots of money in Amazon's pocket. So Amazon making a good choice, I think, for both Twitch, for the gaming community, and for themselves. So that's my stance on Twitch. Amazon buy, market, lock it down. It's a good choice for all of us, so we should rejoice. That said, let's talk about one more big issue that I think's up and in the air right now. We talked last week about the Union Gaming versus SNA issue. The IX Mike, one of the most outspoken players in Dota, accused them of cheating in a Twitter, and it came up again last night in a game between them. And the question that brings on, it's that plus some D2CL stuff, some teams dropping, questions that came up a couple of months ago about a couple of Asian tournaments not maybe paying out to people who won. Is there an issue in tournament oversight? Is it needed? Is this a topic where I have to have a special morning show built around tournament oversight? What do you think?
I mean, in brief, this is a topic that we could easily fill a 35-minute show with.
Yeah.
The big thing is that there have to be something, and I'll defer a bit to veterans like Spitwad on the NA scene. I had a brief Twitter exchange with him over this. That they have tried to do these kinds of council type solutions in the past. The solution that occurred to me, just off the top of my head, was look, you try and get everybody together. You try and get the Velots together, the Star Ladder admins. Yeah. You try and get some of the Join Dota admins. You got Holy Master on that council for sure. And you try to form a council of major tournaments to sort of sign on to a code, okay?
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. I've heard a lot of disturbing things in the past week or so about UG. There are actually some members of other teams that have told me that they believe that they've done this in other games, and that was, I was very, very shocked by that. I obviously can't share names with you here,
right?
But here's the thing, okay? Whether or not they're guilty, that's not what I care about. The fact is that when allegations like this come up, they hurt the sport.
Right.
They hurt the sport really badly. It's like steroids in baseball.
Doping.
You've got to have some kind of organization that is empowered to investigate, to form a code, and to enforce penalties. This is why, as much as we all grind our teeth sometime at the stuff that the IOC does, at the stuff that FIFA and FIBA do. I mean, some of that stuff drives me crazy.
Absolutely.
Those organizations are there for a reason.
Absolutely.
And we need something like that. Valve is not going to be the police. They have said time and time again, we are not interested in running the Dota 2 scene beyond TI4
and that's what
TI, and that's fine.
And that's why we love them.
But you've got to have something there. I don't think that Riot's business model is the way forward, where you have one company running all the tournaments, but you've got to have some kind of oversight, and that's for the protection of these things. We're not just talking about, UG is guilty, who's going to punish them? We're talking about, what if next week somebody accuses Navi of doing this?
Right.
There needs to be somebody that comes in and says, okay, here's the evidence, here's what we feel happened, here's what's going to be done in response. That's for the protection of the teams as much as anything else. And this concern that we have now ongoing, I mean, this is not new about tournaments paying. This goes all the way back to the Premier League. This goes all the way back to all this crap with Marco. This goes on and on and on. WPC Ace now, okay? We have to have somebody, if you're going to be a tournament on the premium tab, if you're going to take advantage of crowdfunding, there needs to be somebody that comes along and says teams and players have got to get paid. And Valve isn't going to do it. Somebody needs to. I am an economist. I can tell you how other sports have dealt with this. I am relatively still new to the esports scene. I don't have the answer for esports. I certainly would be willing to provide my thoughts on that if people are interested. But the point is, right now, it's gotten to the point we got to do something.
Absolutely. I mean, if there are people, if people are interested in setting up some roundtable to talk about this sort of thing, I think it's the next step. When you look at players being protected, when you look at tournaments, the sanctity of them being protected. I mean, I liken this, especially with UG, just to say, I'm not saying that they did cheat. I mean, it's all technically everybody, just so that you know, this is all allegations. It's not 100% guaranteed or true or confirmed that they've done anything wrong. However, this reminds me a lot of the Lance Armstrong accusations a couple of years ago. He was a U.S. hero. He was somebody that people who got into remember cycling blew up in the U.S. right around the time that Lance Armstrong bounced back from cancer and sort of led this charge to be the greatest cycler in the world. It blew up all over the country. Everyone kind of chose this Lance Armstrong hero character, much like in a lot of ways UG is sort of a rallying point for a lot of South American teams. And then the doping scheme came out and was proven to be true, and that really hurt the sport and the development of it. And I think that is a key issue. Whether or not it's a governing body that's the answer, or individual sponsors policing their teams, at the end of the day, any kind of thing like this, like you said, does hurt the development of these sports.
I mean, that analogy is a great one. Look, I want to reiterate to people, this is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, okay? You go along long enough, the financial stakes get high enough, eventually you are going to have an EG, a Navi, a newbie involved in accusations like this. We got to think ahead a little bit, because if we get to that point and we're talking about a $100,000 or $200,000 event, or God forbid even TI5, and you have allegations of this nature coming up, if you don't have the infrastructure to deal with it, all of this progress that we've made getting Dota 2 on ESPN, that goes bye-bye.
Absolutely. And there was an article on Reddit, and we'll just touch this very briefly, and then we're going to move on, about doping in esports that everybody made ridiculous fun of, which I thought was entertaining. However, it does beg the question, if cheating allegations, if pause warding, if fake observers, and then even to the point where someone brought this up, and I thought it was an interesting point, if Dota players start to rely on things like we're never going to see dope. We're never going to see steroids. But there are things like Ritalin, for instance, that's going to increase your focus and allow you to play out a 6-hour session without getting distracted. If those things start to become part of the meta, then we are going to lose credibility with the work we've done with ESPN and other major sports avenues. So maybe a governing body is not a bad idea, but it has to be run by the community. Because of the love that we have for Dota 2, because of the love that we have for Valve's system, it's not going to be done by them. So if that's something you guys like, if it's something you want to see, if it's something you want to see talked about, tweet at us. Let me know at Toffees_Dota2. Let Nahaz know at NahazDota. And if there's people who are interested, we will start working on. Also, I can't speak for you. I will start working on putting together maybe even just a show roundtable where we can get some folks in to talk about the need for oversight. I'd love to host it. Just sit there and listen to smarter minds than myself chatting about the benefit of oversight in Dota. So
I mean, look, as I said, I am happy, and I've said this to Bruno. I've said this to a bunch of people around the scene.
Mm-hmm.
I am a relative newcomer to this scene. I don't know everybody involved. I don't know what's going on in the past. I am happy to offer my expertise, such as it is, for this, and I've done some consulting related to this before. But what we need guys who have been immersed in the scene. Some names you guys will know, some names you don't. But we need the Vlats at the table, but we also need the Holy Masters, the Spitwads, guys that have been in on the admin and the organizing side. Those are the people that we need to go to for these solutions. And it would be great if Valve could certainly be part of the impetus for this.
Right.
I'm not asking them to solve the problem, but anyway, it's a topic that I think we badly need to address, and I'd certainly be happy to talk to you about it again.
Absolutely. So we may do maybe we'll do a talk about, and hopefully that could impetus a behind the scenes meeting of the minds down the line. So that said, that's enough news for today, as we got into some pretty heavy stuff there. Quick updates. We're gonna skip the real world news section today since we're already burning through our time, and we've hit, I think, our time limit for the most part. I do want to, however, give you a games to watch sequence for the day. Games to watch. Let me pull it up here for you. All right, so the list of games today that you're going to be able to keep your eyes on, starting in about half an hour, it's going to be Arrow and XL. Mushi's team versus MSI. Oh, by the way, Starladder starts today, the European division, so that's going to be pretty good. The biggest games, though, are going to be Alliance and Cloud9 is going to start up in about 2.5 hours from now. Definitely worth a watch. And then there's going to be, are you ready for this? Alliance versus Secret Team. Secret Team. Should be interesting. What I love about Secret Team is I'm going to pull up the Dota Lounge for you guys to take a look at, because here is it's my favorite part of what's going on right now. And for those of you listening on the radio show, what I'm doing is I'm pulling up Dota Lounge, I'm scrolling down, and I'm showing you that right now, Secret Team has a 57% advantage to the 43% of Alliance. And that's got to really piss Alliance off, right? The idea that a team that has yet to be announced is expected to beat them.
Well, to be fair, I think that much like the acquisitions of FNG and Vans,
right,
we talked about at the very beginning, this is one of those really badly kept secrets.
Right.
I mean, I think most of the folks that are connected around the Dota 2 scene have a very good idea of what the Secret Team is going to be. But yeah, it's going to be fun. There are going to be fireworks. Calling it a must-watch game is if anything a bit of an understatement.
Yeah.
I think people are going to really lose their proverbial stuff when they see some of these rosters and some of these matchups. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's
going to be a blast. So literally that is a 3-hour sequence. You're going to get Alliance Cloud9, Na'Vi versus Album Sheet. You're going to get Alliance Secret Team, and then Virtus Pro. I don't know. I was going to trouble saying Virtuous. Virtus Pro and Cloud9 all one after another. So that's a bunch of good teams, a bunch of good games one after another. But make sure that you're covering Secret Team, because we're not going to tell you who's on it. You're going to have to find out for yourself, and then we'll talk about it on Friday. So that's your Dota news for today. That's what we've got for you. Do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to say, Nahaz, before we sign out?
No, I think I've said quite enough. I think we're probably at the length record for a Coffee with Toffees, but thank you very much for having me. Shout out to all of our viewers and fans. In particular, the JD streams have had some amazing numbers lately. I've been lucky enough to interact with a bunch of our viewers in chat and on Twitter. We love you guys, and I hope to see even more people joining the party. This scene is about people, and to grow, we need really cool people that are interested in our sport. So come join us. I promise we don't bite much.
It's It's a great outro. Consequently, not the longest Coffees with Toffees. The record was set with 82 minutes, and it was the TI5 wrap up episode, which I think we justified being long, but nobody watched it, so it was a giant hour for a whole lot of nada. I'm sure we'll get something good out of this one because Nahaz, we appreciate you being here. You've been a great guest. If you want to follow him, you can follow him at Nahaz Dota. He's over on JD all the time. Watch the streams. I put Starladder, not JD, but JD doing a lot of really big tournaments right now. I think you guys kind of have the day off today, don't you?
We do, thank goodness. 4Cap still has to cast the I-League qualifiers. That guy has been pulling unbelievable hours lately. But yeah, we're going to be back though later this week. And again, you know what? I'm in the nice position of not really having to care that much.
Right.
I mean, I love JD, but I've got nothing but respect for what BTS does. I just want to see this scene grow, and I just want to see our fans get a lot of great Dota to watch.
Absolutely. So, that said, guys, thank you for joining me, as always, for Coffee with Toffees. Keep in mind, we're Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can get the replays over on soundcloud.com/Toffees_Dota2. You can also find us on YouTube if you want to watch the video version. And that said, the podcast is live right now. I'm working on fixing the title because they loaded it in as a podcast called Toffees_Dota2, which doesn't really market very well. So we'll be changing that within the week. But if you Google Toffees on the podcast or search it on podcast, you'll find it. The RSS feed is set up and it'll stream straight to your phone. Usually the uploads are done within 20 or 30 minutes of finishing the show. So thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day. I'm going to cut the stream in just a second so we can go to some live music while we get everything prepped out. Thank you to Nahaz. Thank you to the viewers. Thank you to everyone who's been so helpful. And make sure you come back on Friday. And as always, guys, Toffees out.